Vesper of Radius got a buff this season, so I wanted to take another look at a very fun build. Now this build is going to be all around spamming your class ability as much as possible and turning your rifts into literal nukes. You're essentially going to be turning your defensive ability into an offensive one because your rift is now going to be able to freeze and explode multiple targets. And since you're going to have infinite class ability, that means the crowd control with this build is just on the next level. But now speaking of freezing, you're also going to have multiple different ways to freeze enemies with things like your weapon, even your melee ability, and that just adds on to the crowd control involved with this build. This build is extremely fun and something I would highly recommend you all try out, but I do want you to know that this is definitely not the best warlock build in the game by any means. However, in most of the gameplay you are seeing is in the legendary campaign, and it can still hold up pretty well. But if you're looking for something fun to mess around with, I would highly recommend giving this one a shot. But hey, are you in the market for a brand new gaming PC? Well, look no further than my custom line Apex gaming PCs. All of these are price optimized to run Destiny 2 at a great performance, and you can completely customize it the way you want to if you would like to swap anything out. All the links that you'll need are in the description of this video, and remember that you can save up to $250 when you use code REST at checkout. But alright, let's jump right into it. I think we first need to start off talking about our rift, and let's take a look at our exotic Vesper of Radius. So this has the exotic perk Planetary Torrent. Rifts periodically release arc shockwaves. Final blows with these shockwaves create an arc explosion. While an arc subclass is equipped, the shockwaves and subsequent explosions blind nearby targets. Rift energy recharges faster when you're surrounded by targets. So this exotic does a lot, and you can pretty much ignore the blinding part because that is based on if you're running an arc subclass. I can do a build like that in the future if you all like to see it. Be sure to let me know. But the main thing is you're going to be getting a lot of increased rift recharge rate on top of that rift making those shockwaves to kill things. Now on its own, it doesn't do a whole bunch, but the main thing we're going to pair it with is our Frost Pulse aspect, which reads casting a rift generates a shockwave that freezes nearby combatants. So the synergy here is when you place your rift down, you're going to create a freezing wave that will first freeze enemies. And what's really cool with the Vesper of Radius, it actually comes out after that initial freeze. So when that arc shockwave comes out, it will shatter all the enemies you froze. Pairing the shatter damage alongside the arc shockwave gives you enough damage to kill a lot of enemies in the game. Also, if enemies are grouped up, the shatter damage will work as a AoE as well to do even more damage, and you can kill a whole group of adds with just one rift. Now that is already extremely effective, but if we take a look at our exotic again, it does have the benefit so your rift will recharge faster. So essentially when you're just surrounded by a bunch of combatants, your rift will recharge insanely fast, and you can just spam these even more often. And once we get later into the build, you'll understand even more how we're going to spam these, but this does play a very vital part in it. But let's jump into our subclass. We've already went over Frost Pulse, so let's take a look at Glacial Harvest. This says freezing targets create stasis shards around the frozen targets. Higher tier combatants create more shards. So this one's really easy to understand. Anytime you freeze a target with anything in your kit, you would create these stasis shards. The stasis shards will actually grant you some melee energy, but they will play a very vital part into some of our mods once we get into them. Now for our grenade, I just like to run Dustville because it does have the lowest cooldown. It is nice to kind of slow enemies down so then I can run up and place a rift on them. You run whatever grenades you want to because you're not really going to be taking advantage of it too much. For your melee, Penumbra Blast is going to be extremely strong because you can freeze a target on demand, and since those stasis shards will also be refilling your melee energy, you're essentially going to have infinite melees with this build alongside your rifts. I would also highly recommend taking healing rifts since you will be up in the fight freezing a bunch of enemies with your rift, so you want to be able to live. If you want to take an empowering rift, you could, because I think it does have a very slightly faster time to put the actual rift down, but I would argue that the healing from healing rift outweighs that in PvE at least, since everything will be shooting at you. Now for your super, you have Winter's Wrath, and this did get a little buff this season to do a little bit more damage, but in all honesty, I'm going to be running Ager Scepter. If you don't know the way this works, it has an exotic catalyst. You can hold down your reload button, and it basically overpowers this trace rifle. When the trace rifle is overpowered, it's going to be doing more damage. It will have the ability to slow enemies on hit and also freeze enemies alongside its normal way the gun works. This will last until you reload or until your super ends, and you're going to have multiple ways again to get that super energy up, so you're going to be able to take advantage of this catalyst a lot. The other parts of the gun are the fact that when you get kills with the weapon, it will make that slow burst freeze enemies, and when you get stasis final blows, it will also refill ammo in the magazine. This plays a very integral part to the build with adding that extra crowd control, and it also gives you the ability to use your Winter Wrath super in a different way if you would like to do that. But now for our fragments to amplify this build, we're going to be running Whisper of Fissures, so increase the damage and size of the burst of stasis when you destroy a stasis crystal or defeat a frozen target. So essentially now the shatter damage you get from killing those frozen targets with your arc shockwave from Vesper Radius just does even more damage now, so you can kill enemies even more. But now we're also going to be running Whisper of Refraction, so defeating slowed or frozen targets grants you class ability energy. Since our rift's going to freeze enemies, then that arc shockwave kills those frozen enemies. This will refund all your class ability energy. So if you have a large group of adds and you pop your rift, you pretty much get your entire cooldown back with this one fragment, and it is very, very strong for this build. Now our next fragment is going to be Whisper of Bond, so defeating frozen targets grants you super energy. So again, your rift will freeze enemies and the arc shockwave will kill them, which will grant you a ton of extra super energy, which again will play heavily into Ager Scepter. And again, Ager Scepter will be able to freeze alongside your melee, so that will play into Whisper of Bonds. So you just have a bunch of super energy to use for that catalyst. And then finally, I do like to run Whisper of Conduction, so nearby stasis shards track to your position. Since my rift will make stasis shards kind of away with Glacial Harvest, this just means they'll track to me, and also if I freeze enemies with my weapon or even my melee, all the shards I make will just constantly track to me, and it just makes the build a little bit easier to use. If you want to opt in to take something like Whisper of Ram to get an overshield and you pick up the stasis shards, you could, but I honestly just really like the easier playstyle with the shards tracking to me. Now for stat distribution, 100 resilience is always the way to go to get that 30% damage reduction, and then you pretty much only need 100 recovery so you can get your rift back as fast as possible. I do have a bunch of discipline since stasis shards going to be refilling my melee anyway, so having something like discipline so I can throw my dust field a little bit more just to slow enemies down is nice, but that's honestly up to you. The main stats are 100 resilience and 100 recovery. Now for your weapons, Ager Scepter is really the only main part of this build. Your other two options is just going to be mainly for DPS scenarios, so obviously having something like a rocket's really good, even something like a fusion rifle is also really good in your second slot. If you don't want to run double special, you can opt in to just taking a primary weapon. I just like to run double special because you're mainly just going to be using this for ad clear anyway, so you don't really need to have a primary weapon to do that, so you could just opt into doing more damage on a boss with a special weapon. But again, these are just kind of up to you. Just always make sure you have something to do some damage in any boss scenario. And now for the artifact perks, nothing matters really at all. You can take things like counter charge, so you can get a sack of armor charge when you stun a champion, and even things like authorized mods. Melee is nice because we will be playing into some melee mods, but in reality, that's the only thing that really does anything. But it is a good thing though, because this build already does perform pretty well, and that just means when a season rolls around that's based on stasis, it'll be even better. But now let's jump over to mods, and if you all like to see a in-depth infographic of this build, be sure to head over to Mobalytics and check it out there. I'll have everything linked down below, and you can look at it over there while I go over it in the video. But all right, let's start off with our helmet. I'm going to be running a harmonic siphon so I can make orbs of power with rapid stasis and weapon final blows. This is based on whatever your subclass you're running, but since I'm mainly running stasis weapons, I'm always taking advantage of this, and now my Ager Scepter can just make orbs. Orbs are going to give you armor charge, some extra super energy, and even play into some of our mods. Now our next mod is going to be hands-on, so I get some extra super energy when I kill enemies with my melee. Since I will have pretty much infinite melee with all the shards I'm making, this just means I will get some extra super from time to time. It doesn't do a whole bunch. You can kind of swap this out for whatever you want to. Hands-on is a nice little buff if you don't know what to put in there. Now Dynamo is the last mod, so this will reduce your super cooldown whenever you use your class ability. Since obviously you're going to be spamming your class ability a lot with this build, you're always going to be getting this extra super energy. Pairing this with the Whisper of Bonds fragment, you just get an absurd amount of super energy, and even if you have the Ager Scepter catalyst procced, you can pop this and you're going to constantly refill it, and you can pretty much have the catalyst up at all times because your super will essentially never end if there are a lot of adds around. Now for our arms, I'm going to be running a stasis loader so I can increase the reload speed of my stasis weapons. Since my rocket launcher I'm running is going to be stasis, this will just give me a little bit more reload speed for DPS. I would swap this out for whatever heavy weapon you are running just so you can increase your DPS. Now I'm also going to be running impact induction and a focusing strike, so this just means I will get some grenade cooldown and class ability cooldown when I deal damage with my melee. Again, since you have infinite melees, you can pretty much always proc this whenever it's off cooldown, and you just get some extra ability energy. Now for your chest piece, I'm going to be running a charged up, so this will increase the amount of armor charge stacks I can carry by 1. So instead of 3, I'll have a total of 4, and I just do a concussive dampener in there just for some damage reduction. Always try to take as many damage resistant mods as you can. Now for my boots, I'm going to be running insulation so I can reduce my class ability cooldown when I pick up an orb. This is going to be really good to get that class ability back, and if you have room, I would opt in to take an absolution over this, but unfortunately I do have to run a minor resilience mod to get to 100 resilience with this build. But if you do have enough energy, I would definitely take absolution. But I also be running the elemental charge, so whenever I collect a stasis shard, I will have an increasing chance to get an armor charge. A single stasis shard will provide 25%, so picking up 4 stasis shards will actually grant you an armor charge. And since you're going to be making stasis shards everywhere, because pretty much everything you build will freeze enemies, you can always just get an extra armor charge stack, which is nice. Now I'm also going to be running stacks on stacks, so picking up an orb power grant you additional armor charge. So now whenever I'm getting armor charge, I would just get 2 instead of 1, and then that's going to pair extremely well with charged up, since I can carry 4. So pretty much picking up 2 orbs gives me 4 armor charge stacks, which is very, very nice. We're going to be taking advantage of our armor charge stacks with utility kickstart, so whenever we use our class ability, we will gain class ability energy back. If you have armor charge, it will actually give you even more cooldown, and the more you have, it will add on to that. So at 4 armor charge stacks, with everything else going on in this build, you pretty much just have infinite rift energy if you are just freezing a bunch of adds in a room. Now we're also going to be running a Reaper, so whenever we use our class ability, the next weapon kill we get will make an orb. Again, since we're spamming rifts a lot, this just means now we're going to have even more orbs coming out. So between Reaper, Harmonic Siphon, and things like Elemental Charge, you're always going to be at max armor charge stacks to always proc this utility kickstart. And again, since we're spamming rifts a lot, Powerful Attraction is going to be a nice mod. So this will allow us to collect nearby orbs of power whenever we use that class ability. So now we're going to be able to pick up our armor charge even easier and proc things like Insulation to get even more class ability cooldown. So as a recap, I think you can see that we're trying to heavily keep our rift up as much as possible. That rift will then be able to freeze enemies and cause that arc shockwave to kill enemies. We're going to be getting a bunch of super energy, a bunch of damage with things like Whisper of Fissures, and with all our shards we're making, Whisper of Conduction is going to make that even easier to collect to further play into being able to spam our class ability, and also give us some melee energy so we can spam that as well, which can also play into some of our mods. You have things like Ager Scepter, which is extremely strong for this build to further being able to freeze enemies, also taking advantage of that super with its catalyst. And overall, this build is just a ton of fun, and if you want to freeze everything with a rift, this is definitely something you want to try out. Now, like I do at the end of all these videos, this is the transmog I am running. I did take advantage of the ornament for Vesper of Radius, and I tried to pair that with some of the Garden of Salvation armor and the Season of the Undying legs. It definitely has a Vex look to it, obviously, and I want to just get all the blues match. I think it looks pretty cool, but if you want to make your Warlock look like this, be sure to copy this down. But all right, I think that's going to do it all for me. Let me know what you all think about the Vesper Radius. Have you tried the buff out with it at all, or have you just tried to build like this in general? It is a ton of fun. It's definitely something I would recommend giving it a shot. Don't get me wrong, it's not going to replace any of the meta in-game builds for the Warlock, but if you're looking to switch things up a little bit, I would definitely give this one a shot. As always, if y'all enjoyed or learned anything new, consider subscribing, dropping a like, and turn those notifications on. But just know that watching the video is way more than enough, and that every single bit of support from you all is truly appreciated. Thank you all so much for watching this one, and have a great day. Peace.